They called me a leech. My own daughter, standing in that sterile Manhattan courtroom, spat those words like poison I'd unknowingly swallowed my whole life. "You just drain us," she said, her voice echoing off the cold marble walls. "Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart." My name is Eleanor, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew who I was. I was wrong. Dead wrong. For decades, I believed I was the devoted mother, the selfless grandmother, the woman who held our family together with nothing but love and sacrifice. But that October morning in 2023, as I sat in that courtroom watching my daughter Macy paint me as a parasite, I realized I'd been living a lie. The harsh fluorescent lights above made everything look sickly yellow. I could smell the cleaning products mixed with anxiety sweat from everyone packed into those wooden benches. My hands trembled as I clutched my worn leather purse, the same one I'd carried for 15 years because I never bought myself anything new. I always gave everything to them first. Macy stood there in her expensive navy suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her manicured nails pointing at me like accusations. This was the same little girl I used to rock to sleep, singing lullabies until my throat was raw. The same child I worked double shifts for, cleaning bedpans and changing sheets at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, just so she could have dance lessons, piano lessons, the best clothes. "Your Honor," she continued, her voice steady and cold, "my mother has been financially dependent on our family for years. She contributed nothing to the household expenses while living in my father's property, and now she's trying to claim assets that rightfully belong to us." Each word was a knife. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to tell that judge about the thousands of dollars I'd poured into their lives, the credit cards I'd maxed out for their emergencies, the retirement savings I'd emptied to help them buy their first house. But my lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia Chen, squeezed my arm and whispered, "Wait. Let her finish." I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on West 84th Street, just 3 blocks from the subway station. Every morning for the past 10 years, I'd wake to the sound of garbage trucks and distant sirens, the symphony of Manhattan that never sleeps. My apartment smelled perpetually of the vanilla candles I burned to mask the mustiness of old building pipes and the loneliness that seemed to seep through the walls. The photos on my mantelpiece told the story I thought was mine. Macy's graduation from Columbia. Her wedding day, me beaming beside her in a dress I'd found on sale at Macy's department store. Little Lily, my granddaughter, blowing out candles on her 5th birthday cake while I knelt beside her, helping her make a wish. Christmas mornings, Easter brunches, summer vacations where I was always the one behind the camera, capturing everyone else's joy. But looking at those photos now, I see something different. I see myself always on the periphery, always serving, always giving. Never quite part of the picture, just the woman who made the picture possible. That morning in court started like any other. I'd made my instant coffee, the same brand I'd been buying for 20 years because it was cheap and I'd convinced myself I liked it. I'd sat in my threadbare armchair, watching the early morning joggers in Central Park through my small window, wondering if anyone would call me that day. Then my phone rang. "Mom, we need to talk," Macy said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "Can you meet us at the courthouse at 10? "The courthouse?" My heart started racing. "Is everything okay? Is someone in trouble?" "Just be there, Mom. It's important." She hung up before I could ask more questions. I spent the next hour getting dressed, choosing my best blouse, the navy blue one with tiny flowers that I'd worn to every important family event. I wanted to look respectable, worthy of whatever conversation awaited me. The subway ride from my apartment to Lower Manhattan gave me time to think, but my mind kept spinning in circles. What could they possibly need to discuss at a courthouse? I gripped the metal pole as the train swayed, watching the faces of other passengers, wondering if any of them had children who'd stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped caring. When I arrived at the courthouse, I saw them waiting. My ex-husband Harold, looking uncomfortable in his outdated brown suit. Macy, checking her phone and tapping her foot impatiently. And my granddaughter Lily, now 16, sitting quietly on a bench, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "Grandma Eleanor." Lily jumped up and hugged me tight. At least someone was happy to see me. "What's this about?" I asked Harold, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Let's go inside," Macy said, already walking toward the courtroom doors. That's when I learned they were contesting my residency rights in the small apartment Harold had deeded to me after our divorce 20 years ago. They claimed I was living there without paying fair rent, that I was a financial burden, that I needed to either start paying market rate or move out. "She's been living there practically for free," Macy told the judge. "While we struggle to pay our own mortgage, she sits in that apartment contributing nothing." I felt the air leave my lungs. contributing nothing? I'd worked 43 years as a registered nurse. I'd raised 2 children after Harold left me for his secretary. I'd sacrificed my entire retirement fund to help them through their financial crises. But as I sat there listening to my daughter describe me as a parasite, memories started flooding back. Not the happy memories I'd been clinging to, but different ones. Uncomfortable truths I'd been pushing down for years. I remembered 7 years ago when Macy called me crying because they couldn't make their mortgage payment. Without hesitation, I'd written them a check for $8,000, the last of my savings account. "We'll pay you back, Mom, I promise," she'd said. They never did. I remembered 3 years ago when Harold needed money for his hip replacement surgery. His insurance wouldn't cover the full cost, and he was in agony. I took out a personal loan, putting my apartment as collateral, and handed him $12,000. "This makes us even for all those years of child support," he'd said with a smile. Even? I'd raised his children alone while he started a new family. I remembered last Christmas when I'd spent $600 I didn't have buying gifts for everyone, then sat alone in my apartment eating a frozen dinner while they celebrated at Macy's house. "Sorry, Mom, we're keeping it small this year," she'd said. But I saw the photos on Facebook. The house was full of people. I just wasn't one of them. The judge asked me to explain my financial situation. I stood up, my knees shaking, and tried to find my voice. "Your Honor, I've been living on Social Security and a small pension from the hospital where I worked for over 40 years. The apartment they're talking about, it was part of our divorce settlement. I've maintained it, paid utilities, made improvements with my own money." "But she hasn't paid rent," Macy interrupted. "Market rate for that apartment would be at least $2,000 a month. $2,000. I made less than that total on Social Security. If they forced me to pay market rent, I'd have nothing left for food, medicine, or basic survival." "I'd like to see the original divorce decree," the judge said, and that's when Patricia, my lawyer, stood up with a folder I'd never seen before. "Your Honor, we have some additional documentation that might be relevant to this case." I looked at Patricia in confusion. What documentation? I'd given her everything I had. "Mrs. Morrison," she said to me gently, "when you came to my office last month, you mentioned finding some legal papers in your apartment that you didn't understand. Do you remember giving them to me?" I nodded slowly. She was talking about that manila envelope I'd found stuck behind my bedroom radiator when I was cleaning. It was sealed and covered in dust, with my name written on it in Harold's handwriting. I'd meant to open it years ago but somehow never got around to it. When I finally did, the legal language inside made no sense to me. "Your Honor," Patricia continued, "I'd like to present evidence of a family trust established by Harold Morrison in 1995, shortly after his divorce from Mrs. Eleanor Morrison." Harold's face went white. Macy stopped tapping her foot. "A trust?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor. An irrevocable trust funded with several properties and investments, designed to provide financial security for Mrs. Morrison and her children. According to these documents, Mrs. Morrison has the right to occupy the West 84th Street apartment rent-free for the remainder of her life, and she's entitled to monthly disbursements from the trust assets." The courtroom went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear the air conditioning humming. I could hear someone in the back row shifting in their seat. "How much are we talking about?" the judge asked. Patricia looked down at her papers. "The trust is currently valued at approximately $1.2 million, Your Honor. Mrs. Morrison should have been receiving monthly payments of approximately $3,000 for the past 28 years. I gripped the arms of my chair. $3,000 a month. For 28 years. I did the quick math in my head, something I'd gotten good at from years of stretching every penny. That was over $1 million I should have received. "Where have these payments been going?" the judge asked. Patricia looked directly at Harold. "According to the bank records, the payments have been deposited into an account controlled by Mr. Harold Morrison." Harold stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, I can explain. Sit down, Mr. Morrison," the judge said firmly. "We'll get to your explanation." I felt like I was in a dream. A nightmare. For nearly 3 decades, while I'd been scraping together quarters for the laundromat, while I'd been buying generic groceries and wearing the same coat for 10 winters, these people had been living off money that was supposed to take care of me. Macy's perfect composure cracked. "We didn't know," she said weakly. "Dad never told us about any trust." "The trust documents indicate that both Mr. Morrison and his daughter were named as co-trustees," Patricia continued. "They were legally obligated to ensure Mrs. Morrison received her payments and understood her rights." That's when it hit me. They knew. They'd always known. Every time they'd made me feel guilty for living in their apartment, every time they'd made me feel like a burden, every time they'd rolled their eyes when I needed help with groceries, they'd known I was entitled to financial security. I thought about all the nights I'd laid awake worrying about money. All the times I'd skipped meals to make sure I could afford my blood pressure medication. All the times I'd declined invitations to dinner or movies with the few friends I had left because I couldn't afford them. Your Honor, I finally found my voice, and it was stronger than I expected. I had no knowledge of this trust. For the past 28 years, I've been living in poverty while my family made me believe I was dependent on their charity. The judge looked at Harold and Macy with undisguised disgust. This appears to be a clear case of elder financial abuse. Mr. Morrison, Ms. Morrison, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into these trust assets and their administration. Mrs. Morrison, you'll be receiving every penny you're owed, plus interest and damages. But it wasn't the money that broke my heart. It was the realization that the people I'd loved most in the world had been systematically lying to me, stealing from me, and making me feel worthless while they lived comfortable lives on what should have been my income. After court that day, I walked home alone through Central Park. The autumn leaves were falling, painting the paths in shades of gold and red. I sat on a bench near the reservoir and watched an elderly couple feeding ducks. They looked happy, content, secure. I wondered if I'd ever feel that way. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Grandma, are you okay? I'm so sorry. I didn't know any of this. Sweet Lily. At 16, she was the only one in my family who still seemed to have a heart. I texted back, I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about your grandmother. But I wasn't fine. I was devastated. Not just about the money, though that was shocking enough. I was devastated by the betrayal. By the years of manipulation. By the way they'd made me doubt my own worth. Over the next few days, Patricia worked with forensic accountants to trace the trust assets. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. Not only had Harold been stealing my monthly payments, but he'd been using the trust money to invest in properties and businesses. He'd bought a vacation home in the Hamptons. He'd funded Macy's husband's restaurant. He'd paid for their children's private school tuition. Meanwhile, I'd been shopping at thrift stores and collecting coupons like they were gold coins. The media picked up the story. Local family accused of elder financial abuse, read the headline in the New York Post. There was my photo, looking small and confused outside the courthouse. The comments section was brutal. Why didn't she know about her own trust, wrote one person. These adult children are disgusting, wrote another. She should have fought for herself years ago, wrote a third. That last comment stung the most because it was true. Why hadn't I fought for myself? Why had I accepted their narrative that I was a burden? Why had I spent 30 years apologizing for existing? I knew the answer, and it was painful. I'd been programmed my entire life to put everyone else's needs before my own. My mother had done it. Her mother had done it. It was what women of my generation were taught to do. We were supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of love and attention we received. But I was done being grateful for scraps. Patricia called me with an update. The trust was actually worth more than initially assessed. With compound interest and investment returns, the total amount owed to me was nearly $2 million. $2 million. I'd spent years worrying about whether I could afford a $20 doctor copay, and there was $2 million with my name on it. What do you want to do, Eleanor? Patricia asked. We can pursue criminal charges for theft and elder abuse. Harold and Macy could face serious jail time. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted them to suffer the way they'd made me suffer. Part of me wanted them to know what it felt like to worry about money, to feel powerless, to doubt their own worth. But another part of me was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being angry. Tired of letting their betrayal consume my thoughts. I want what's mine, I told Patricia. Every penny, plus interest. But I don't want to send them to prison. I just want to be free of them. The legal process took months, but eventually, the money was transferred to accounts in my name. For the first time in my adult life, I was financially secure. More than secure. I was wealthy. The first thing I did was nothing. I sat in my apartment for 3 days, just processing the reality of my situation. No more counting pennies. No more generic groceries. No more wearing coats until they fell apart. No more feeling grateful for whatever attention my family decided to give me. Then I started making changes. I hired a decorator to redo my apartment. Gone were the threadbare furniture and faded curtains. I chose warm colors, comfortable furniture, artwork that made me smile. I bought Egyptian cotton sheets and down pillows. I installed a coffee maker that made real coffee, not the instant powder I'd been drinking for decades. I bought new clothes. Not expensive designer things, but quality pieces that fit well and made me feel confident. I got my hair done at a salon instead of cutting it myself in the bathroom mirror. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do and yes to things I did. I joined a book club at the local library. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. I bought a membership at the New York Botanical Garden and spent hours walking among the flowers. Most importantly, I started therapy with a wonderful counselor named Dr. Sarah Rodriguez. She helped me understand how I'd been conditioned to accept emotional and financial abuse as love. She helped me recognize the difference between being needed and being used. Eleanor, she said during one of our sessions, you spent 70 years believing that your worth came from how much you could give other people. It's time to learn that you have value just for being who you are. It was hard work, unlearning a lifetime of conditioning. There were days when I felt guilty for spending money on myself. Days when I doubted whether I deserved the financial security I'd finally gained. Days when I missed my family despite everything they'd done to me. But gradually, I started to feel something I'd never experienced before. Peace. Real peace. Not the exhausted collapse I used to feel after giving everything I had to other people, but genuine contentment. Harold tried to contact me several times. First, he sent flowers with a note that said, "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. As if stealing $2 million from me over 3 decades was just a simple mistake. Then he called, leaving long voicemails trying to explain himself. He'd been protecting me from the responsibility of managing money. He'd been investing it for my future. He'd planned to tell me eventually. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them all the way through. I blocked his number. I had no interest in his excuses or his attempts to rewrite history. Macy was more persistent. She showed up at my apartment one evening, tears streaming down her face, begging for forgiveness. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't understand what Dad was doing. I thought the trust money was his. I never meant for you to get hurt." I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and sacrificed for, and felt something I'd never felt before when looking at her. Detachment. She was still beautiful, still polished, still perfectly put together. But I could see through the performance now. "Macy," I said calmly, "you were named as a co-trustee. You signed documents. You knew exactly what was happening. But Dad told me, your father told you what you wanted to hear so you could live with yourselves while spending my money. It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I asked. "Explain to me how you could watch me struggle financially for 30 years while you lived in nice houses, sent your children to private schools, and took expensive vacations, all funded by money that belonged to me." She couldn't answer. She just cried harder. "Mom, please. We're family. Family forgives each other." That word. Family. They'd used it like a weapon against me for so long, making me believe that being family meant I had to accept whatever treatment they gave me. "Family doesn't steal from each other, Macy," I said quietly. "Family doesn't lie to each other for 30 years. Family doesn't make each other feel like burdens for existing." "What do you want from me?" she asked desperately. "What can I do to fix this?" I thought about her question for a long time. What did I want from her? "I want you to leave me alone," I finally said. "I want to live the rest of my life in peace without worrying about what you and your father might take from me next." "But what about Lily? She loves you. She needs her grandmother." Lily. My sweet granddaughter. The one person in my family who'd never made me feel small or unwanted. The thought of losing her was the hardest part of all this. "Lily is welcome in my life anytime she wants to be," I said. "But she has to choose that for herself, without pressure from you. If she wants a relationship with me, it has to be real, not something you're orchestrating to get back into my good graces." Macy left that night without getting the forgiveness she came for. I watched her walk away from my window, her shoulders shaking with sobs, and I felt sad but not guilty. There's a difference. A few weeks later, Lily called me. "Grandma, can we have lunch? Just you and me?" We met at a small cafe near Lincoln Center. Lily looked older than 16, more mature, like the family drama had aged her. "I'm so sorry about everything," she said as soon as we sat down. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't understand how bad it was. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. This isn't your fault." "Can I ask you something?" she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "How did you stand it for so long? Being treated like that?" It was a good question. An important question. I thought it was love, I told her honestly. I thought that's what families did. I thought my job was to give and give until there was nothing left of me, and in return, I'd get to be part of something. I'd get to belong somewhere. "But you always belonged, Grandma. You're our family." "No, honey. I was your family servant. There's a difference. I was useful to them as long as I was giving them something they needed. Money, babysitting, emotional support, whatever. But the moment I needed something from them, they made me feel like I was being unreasonable. Lily nodded slowly. At 16, she was already wise enough to recognize the truth when she heard it. Are you going to forgive them? She asked. Another good question. I'd been thinking about forgiveness a lot in therapy. I don't know, I said honestly. Dr. Rodriguez says forgiveness is something I do for myself, not for them. When I'm ready to let go of my anger because carrying it hurts me more than it hurts them, then I'll forgive. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let them back into my life. Some bridges burn completely, and that's okay. We talked for 2 hours that day. About the family, about her plans for college, about her dreams and fears. It felt natural and easy in a way conversations with my family hadn't felt in years. As we were leaving, Lily hugged me tight. I love you, Grandma. For real. Not because you give me things or do things for me, but just because you're you. I started crying right there on the sidewalk. She loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. Such a simple concept, but I'd never experienced it before. Over the following months, Lily and I developed a real relationship. She came to my apartment for dinner once a week. We went to museums and shows. We talked about books and boys and her plans for the future. She never asked me for money or favors. She just enjoyed my company. It was revolutionary. Harold made one last attempt to contact me about 6 months after the court case. He sent a letter, handwritten, asking if we could meet to work things out like adults. I read the letter twice, then threw it away. We'd had 30 years to work things out like adults. The time for that had passed. Macy eventually stopped trying to reach me directly, but I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling financially. The house they'd been living in was actually owned by the trust, and as part of the settlement, I was reclaiming it. She and her family had to move into a smaller place. Her husband's restaurant, which had been funded with my money, was also struggling. I felt sorry for them, but I didn't feel responsible for their problems anymore. They'd created this situation with their choices. They could figure out how to live with the consequences. The most surprising thing about my new life was how light I felt. For 70 years, I'd carried the weight of everyone else's expectations, needs, and problems. I'd been the family pack mule, carrying whatever burden they decided to load onto me. Now I carried only my own concerns, and it was amazing how manageable they seemed when they were actually mine to manage. I started traveling. Small trips at first, weekend getaways to places I'd always wanted to see but never could afford. I went to Boston and walked the Freedom Trail. I visited Philadelphia and saw the Liberty Bell. I took a train to Washington, D.C. and spent hours in the Smithsonian museums. Each trip taught me something new about myself. I liked art museums more than I'd expected. I was braver than I'd given myself credit for. I enjoyed eating alone in restaurants, watching people, listening to conversations. I didn't need someone else to validate my experiences. I could have adventures all by myself. On my 73rd birthday, I did something I'd never done before. I threw myself a party. Not a big celebration, just a small dinner at a nice restaurant with the few real friends I'd made in recent months. Patricia, my lawyer, who'd become a friend. Dr. Rodriguez, my therapist, who'd helped me find myself. Margaret from my book club, who made me laugh. James from my painting class, who complimented my watercolors and meant it. These people liked me for who I was. They enjoyed my company without expecting anything from me in return. They were what real friends looked like. Lily came too, of course. She gave me a small potted plant with a note that said, "For new beginnings." I cried when I read it. After dinner, as I was walking home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not pretending to be happy. Not grateful for scraps happy. Actually, genuinely happy. The city looked different to me now. The lights were brighter. The energy was exhilarating instead of overwhelming. I belonged here, in this place, in this life I was building for myself. I thought about the woman I'd been just a year ago. The woman who apologized for existing. The woman who accepted emotional crumbs and called it love. The woman who believed her worth was measured by how much she could sacrifice for other people. That woman was gone. She'd served her purpose, raising children and caring for others, but her time was over. In her place was someone new. Someone I was still getting to know. This new Eleanor had boundaries. She said no when she meant no and yes when she meant yes. She spent money on things that brought her joy without asking permission from anyone. She made decisions based on what she wanted, not what other people expected from her. This new Eleanor was still kind and generous, but in ways that felt good to her. She volunteered at a literacy program, teaching adults to read. She donated anonymously to causes she cared about. She helped neighbors when they needed it, but only when she genuinely wanted to help, not out of guilt or obligation. Most importantly, this new Eleanor had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. She'd been surrounded by family for decades but felt desperately lonely because they didn't really see her. Now she lived mostly alone but rarely felt lonely because the relationships she did have were real. A year after the court case, I was reading in my favorite chair when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Morrison? This is Detective Williams from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. We're investigating your case as part of a larger pattern of elder financial abuse. Would you be willing to testify about your experiences?" They'd found other cases. Other families who'd been stealing from elderly relatives. Other children who'd been manipulating their parents' finances while making them feel grateful for the privilege of being robbed. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll testify." The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Harold and Macy would be facing criminal charges after all, along with several other defendants in similar cases. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew it was important. Not just for me, but for all the other elderly people who were being manipulated and abused by the people they trusted most. Dr. Rodriguez and I talked about the upcoming trial during our sessions. "How do you feel about seeing them in court again?" she asked. "Nervous," I admitted. "But not afraid. A year ago, I would have been terrified. I would have worried about their feelings, about how the trial might affect them. Now I'm more concerned about making sure other people don't go through what I went through." That's significant growth, Eleanor. I feel like I spent the first 70 years of my life living for other people. If I'm lucky enough to have another 10 or 20 years, I want them to count. I want to use whatever time I have left to actually live. What does that look like for you? I thought about her question. What did living actually look like? I want to keep learning new things. I want to travel more. I want to write about my experiences, maybe help other people who are going through similar situations. I want to spend time with people who value me. I want to wake up each morning excited about the day ahead instead of dreading it. Those are beautiful goals. I also want to stop feeling guilty for wanting those things. That was the hardest part, letting go of the guilt. I'd been programmed to believe that wanting things for myself was selfish. That prioritizing my own happiness was wrong. That I should be grateful for whatever treatment I received from others. Unlearning those beliefs was like learning to walk again. Every step felt unnatural at first, but gradually it became easier. Spring came early that year. I spent hours walking through Central Park, watching the trees bloom, listening to the birds sing. I'd always loved spring, but this year it felt personal. Like nature was celebrating my rebirth along with its own. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Harold and Macy sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I remembered them. Older. More fragile. For moments, I almost felt sorry for them. But then I'd remember the 30 years of manipulation. The countless times they'd made me feel guilty for needing anything. The way they'd stolen my financial security while watching me struggle. The years of my life I'd lost to worry and self-doubt because of their lies. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand with steady legs. The prosecutor asked me to describe my relationship with my family, the financial abuse I'd endured, and the impact it had on my life. I told the truth. All of it. The good memories and the bad ones. The love I'd given and the contempt I'd received in return. The way they'd systematically isolated me from my own financial resources while making me believe I was dependent on their generosity. "Mrs. Morrison," the prosecutor asked, "in your own words, how did this abuse affect your daily life?" I looked out at the courtroom. Lily was there, sitting in the back, giving me an encouraging nod. Patricia was there, smiling supportively. Several other elderly victims were there, waiting their turn to testify. "For 30 years, I said, my voice clear and strong, I lived in fear. Fear that I couldn't take care of myself. Fear that I was a burden to my family. Fear that if I asked for too much or expected too much, they'd abandon me completely. I apologized for existing. I made myself small so they'd have room to be big. I accepted emotional scraps and convinced myself it was love. And how do you feel now?" "Now I feel free," I said, and I meant it completely. Free from their manipulation. Free from the fear. Free to be myself without apology. They took 30 years of my life, but they're not getting one more day. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter than I had in decades. I'd spoken my truth publicly. I'd refused to protect the people who'd hurt me. I'd chosen myself over their comfort. The jury found Harold and Macy guilty on multiple counts of elder financial abuse and fraud. Harold was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay additional restitution. Macy received 18 months probation and community service. I felt no satisfaction from their punishment. No revanche for la joy. Just a quiet sense of justice being served. After the trial, Lily and I went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant near my apartment. "How are you feeling, Grandma?" she asked as we waited for our food. "Tired," I said honestly. "But good tired. Like I've been carrying heavy bags for a long time and I finally got to put them down." "Are you glad you testified?" "Yes. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted to help others. There are so many elderly people being taken advantage of by their own families. If my story helps even one person recognize what's happening to them and fight back, then it was worth it." Lily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Grandma. You're the strongest person I know." Strongest. Me. A year ago, I would have laughed at that description. I'd seen myself as weak, needy, pathetic. Now I was beginning to understand that surviving 30 years of emotional and financial abuse while still maintaining my capacity for love and kindness actually required enormous strength. That summer, I did something I'd dreamed about for decades. I took a month-long trip to Europe. I visited museums in Paris, walked along canals in Amsterdam, ate gelato in Rome. I stayed in nice hotels, ate at good restaurants, and bought souvenirs without checking my bank balance first. In each city, I thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who would have felt guilty for spending money on herself. The woman who would have worried constantly about what her family was doing without her. The woman who would have cut her trip short if anyone called asking for help. That woman would never have seen the Mona Lisa or thrown a coin into the Trevi fountain. She would never have stood at the top of the Eiffel Tower or walked through the flower markets of Amsterdam. She would have denied herself these experiences because she'd been taught that her joy didn't matter. But I was no longer that woman. On my last night in Rome, I sat at a sidewalk cafe watching people pass by. Families with young children, elderly couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing together. All of them simply living their lives, taking up space in the world without apology. I thought about the family I'd lost and the life I'd gained. For most of my existence, I'd believed that being loved meant accepting whatever treatment people decided to give me. I'd confused loyalty with self-sacrifice, family with servitude. Now I understood that real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself. Real love doesn't ask you to apologize for having needs. Real love doesn't make you feel grateful for basic respect and kindness. I'd spent 70 years waiting for my family to love me the way I deserved to be loved. Now I was learning to love myself that way instead. When I returned to New York, my apartment felt like home in a way it never had before. Not because it was where my family had placed me, but because it was the space I'd chosen to create for myself. I'd redecorated completely. Gone were the faded family photos and guilt-inducing mementos. In their place were pictures from my travels, artwork that made me smile, books I'd actually read rather than just displaying to look intellectual. The apartment smelled like the expensive vanilla candles I now bought without apology. The refrigerator was full of foods I actually enjoyed eating. The closet contained clothes that fit well and made me feel confident. Most importantly, the space felt peaceful. No tension hung in the air from difficult relationships. No obligation clouded my enjoyment of my surroundings. For the first time in my adult life, I lived somewhere that was truly mine. Lily came for dinner the week I returned from Europe. I cooked her favorite meal, lasagna with a salad and garlic bread, and we sat at my small dining table sharing stories. "Tell me about Paris," she said, her eyes bright with interest. I showed her photos on my phone. The Louvre, the Seine River, the cafe where I'd eaten breakfast each morning. I told her about the French woman at the market who'd complimented my dress, about the street musician who'd played violin outside my hotel, about the moment I'd stood in front of Monet's water lilies and cried from the beauty of it all. "I want to travel like that someday," Lily said. "Just go places because I want to see them, not because someone else picked them or planned everything for me." "You will," I told her. "And you'll do it without asking permission from anyone." After dinner, as Lily was getting ready to leave, she hugged me tighter than usual. "I love our dinners together, Grandma. They're the best part of my week." "Mine too, sweetheart." "Can I tell you something?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. "Of course. I think you're happier now. I mean, I know the situation with Mom and Grandpa Harold is awful, but you seem lighter somehow. More like yourself." Out of the mouths of babes. She was absolutely right. Losing my family had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. I was more myself at 73 than I'd ever been at any other age. Fall arrived with its usual drama of changing leaves and cooler weather. I joined a seniors hiking group and spent weekends walking trails upstate. I volunteered at the literacy center twice a week, helping adults learn to read. I took a cooking class and learned to make dishes I'd always wanted to try. Each new activity, each new friendship, each new experience added layers to my understanding of who I was when I wasn't trying to be who others needed me to be. Dr. Rodriguez and I began meeting less frequently as my emotional healing progressed. I'm proud of how far you've come, she said during one of our final regular sessions. When you first came to see me, you could barely identify your own feelings, let alone express them. Now you're making choices based on your own needs and desires without apologizing for them. It feels strange sometimes, I admitted. Good strange, but strange. Like I'm learning to use muscles I never knew I had. That's exactly what you're doing. You're exercising your autonomy, your self-advocacy, your boundary-setting abilities. These are skills you were never allowed to develop in your family system. Do you think I'll ever stop feeling guilty for choosing myself over them? The guilt will fade as you continue to experience the positive results of your choices. Each day you live authentically, each relationship you build based on mutual respect, each moment of genuine happiness you experience will reinforce that you made the right decision. She was right. The guilt was already becoming less frequent, less intense. It had been replaced by something I'd never experienced before: pride in myself. Pride in my courage to leave a toxic situation. Pride in my ability to start over at 73. Pride in the life I was building from scratch. On New Year's Eve, instead of spending the evening alone watching television as I had for so many previous years, I went to a party at Margaret's apartment. She'd invited several people from our book club, along with some neighbors and friends. As midnight approached, we all stood on Margaret's balcony overlooking the city. The sounds of celebration echoed from every direction. Fireworks lit up the sky. Car horns honked. People cheered from nearby rooftops. "What's your resolution for the new year, Eleanor?" someone asked. I thought about the question seriously. What did I want for myself in the coming year? I want to keep becoming more myself, I said finally. Less apologetic, more authentic. Less worried about other people's opinions, more focused on my own truth. That's beautiful, Margaret said, raising her champagne glass. To becoming more ourselves. We all clinked glasses and watched the fireworks paint the dark sky in brilliant colors. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, afraid to spend money on herself, desperate for crumbs of approval from people who didn't value her. That woman would never have imagined standing on a balcony in Manhattan at midnight, surrounded by genuine friends, raising a glass to her own authenticity. The first year of my new life had been about survival, about simply getting through the shock of betrayal and learning to function independently. The second year, I decided, would be about growth. About discovering what I was capable of when I wasn't being held back by other people's limitations and expectations. Spring arrived early again, and with it came a phone call I hadn't expected. A publisher had read about my case in the newspaper and wanted to know if I'd be interested in writing a book about my experiences. A book? I asked, surprised. I'm not a writer. You don't have to be a professional writer, the editor explained. We're looking for authentic stories from real people. Your experience with elder abuse and financial exploitation is unfortunately common, but your recovery story could help others in similar situations. I thought about it for several days. Did I want to revisit all those painful memories? Did I want to share such personal experiences with strangers? But then I thought about the other elderly victims I'd met during the trial. The isolation they felt. The shame. The belief that they somehow deserved the treatment they were receiving. If my story could help even one person recognize their own situation and find the courage to change it, wouldn't that be worthwhile? Yes, I told the editor when I called back. I'll write the book. Writing my story was harder than I'd expected, but also more therapeutic. Working with a professional editor, I learned to craft scenes, develop characters, and structure narrative. But more than that, I learned to see my own life as a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end rather than just a series of things that happened to me. The process of writing helped me understand patterns I hadn't recognized while living through them. I saw how my mother's relationship with my father had modeled self-sacrifice as love. I understood how my generation of women had been taught that our worth came from service to others. I recognized the subtle ways Harold and Macy had gradually isolated me from other relationships and sources of support. Most importantly, I saw my own strength. Reading back through my story, I was amazed by how much I'd endured and survived. The woman I'd thought was weak had actually been remarkably resilient. The book was published 8 months later with the title, The Cost of Love: Breaking Free from Family Financial Abuse. The publisher arranged several interviews and speaking engagements. At my first book signing, an elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for writing this," she said quietly. "My son has been managing my finances for 5 years, and after reading your story, I realize he's been stealing from me. I'm going to get help." That conversation made every difficult moment of the writing process worthwhile. Over the following months, I spoke at senior centers, community organizations, and conferences about elder abuse. I met dozens of people who were living variations of my story. Some were being financially exploited. Others were being emotionally manipulated. All of them felt ashamed and alone. The hardest part, one woman told me, is that it's your own family doing it to you. Strangers, you expect might try to take advantage. But your own children? The people you raised and sacrificed for? How do you accept that they see you as something to be used rather than someone to be loved? I understood completely. The betrayal by family cut deeper than any other kind of abuse because it violated the most fundamental trust we have as human beings. You don't have to accept it, I told her. You can choose to protect yourself, even from your own family. Especially from your own family. As my second year of freedom progressed, I continued to expand my world. I joined a writing group and worked on my second book, this one a memoir about starting over in your 70s. I took art classes and discovered I had a talent for watercolor painting. I traveled to California to visit old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Each new experience taught me something about myself. I was braver than I'd thought. More creative. More resilient. More worthy of love and respect than I'd ever believed. Lily, now 18 and preparing for college, came to dinner one Sunday in late summer. I got into Columbia, she announced, grinning widely. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. I want to study social work, she said. Specifically working with elderly populations. Your story inspired me. I started crying right there at the dinner table. To think that my pain could be transformed into something that would help other people through my granddaughter's career choice felt like a miracle. Grandma, are you okay? Lily asked, concerned. I'm more than okay, I said, wiping my eyes. I'm grateful. Grateful that something good came out of all that suffering. Grateful that you found your calling. Grateful that we have each other. That fall, as Lily started college, I realized I'd been living independently and happily for 2 full years. The woman who'd once been afraid to make any decision without considering everyone else's feelings was now making choices based solely on her own interests and values. I'd planned a winter trip to Arizona to escape the New York cold. I'd signed up for a photography class to improve my travel pictures. I'd made friends with my neighbors and organized monthly potluck dinners in the building's community room. Most amazingly, I'd learned to enjoy my own company. The solitude that had once felt like punishment now felt like freedom. I could read all day without interruption. I could eat what I wanted when I wanted it. I could decorate my space to reflect my tastes rather than trying to please others. On the second anniversary of the court case that had changed my life, Patricia and I met for lunch at the same restaurant where I'd celebrated my birthday. How do you feel about everything now? She asked as we looked over the menu. Grateful, I said without hesitation. I know that sounds strange, given everything I went through, but I'm grateful it happened. Why? Because it forced me to find myself. I never would have had the courage to leave that situation on my own. I would have stayed, letting them drain me emotionally and financially until there was nothing left. The court case made me face the truth about my life, and the truth set me free. Patricia smiled. You know, in all my years as an attorney, I've never seen anyone transform themselves the way you have. Most people in your situation just want their money back. You used your experience as a springboard to completely recreate your life. I had to, I said. The alternative was going back to being a victim, and I couldn't do that anymore. Once you see clearly how people have been treating you, you can't unsee it. That afternoon, walking home through Central Park, I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process of making small choices that honored my own needs and desires rather than defaulting to what others expected from me. I'd learned to say no without explaining myself. I'd learned to spend money on things that brought me joy without asking permission from anyone. I'd learned to end conversations that made me feel bad about myself. I'd learned to choose how to spend my time based on what fulfilled me rather than what others needed from me. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was complete by myself. I didn't need other people to validate my existence or give my life meaning. I could create meaning for myself through my relationships, my work, my hobbies, and my contribution to the world. The relationships I had now were based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Lily loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. My friends enjoyed my company because they found me interesting and fun to be with. The people in my writing group valued my contributions to our discussions. These relationships felt entirely different from the ones I'd had with Harold and Macy. There was no underlying transaction, no sense that I had to earn love through service or sacrifice. I was valued simply for being myself. As winter approached, I found myself looking forward to each day in a way I never had before. I had plans, projects, goals that excited me. I was learning Italian through an online course. I was working on my second book. I'd booked a spring trip to Greece. I was living, really living, for the first time in my 75 years. One snowy December evening, as I sat in my warm apartment reading and listening to classical music, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Harold's name. For a moment, I considered answering. But then I remembered Dr. Rodriguez's advice about protecting my peace. I let the call go to voicemail. Later, I listened to the message. Harold's voice sounded old, tired, defeated. "Eleanor, it's me. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you, and I know sorry isn't enough. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be fixed. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong I was. I hope you're happy. I hope you're living the life you deserve." I played the message twice, then deleted it. His apology meant nothing to me. Not because I was cruel or unforgiving, but because it was too little, too late. He'd had 30 years to treat me with respect and dignity. He'd chosen not to. His regret now didn't change the decades I'd lost to his manipulation and theft. More importantly, I no longer needed his validation or acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. I'd moved beyond caring what he thought or felt about our past. I'd created a life that had nothing to do with him, and his opinion of that life was irrelevant to my happiness. Christmas that year was different from any I'd ever experienced. Instead of stressing over gifts for people who didn't appreciate them, I went to midnight mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to do alone. The music, the lights, the sense of spiritual connection with hundreds of strangers felt more meaningful than any family gathering I'd ever attended. I was surrounded by people but not performing for anyone. I was participating in something beautiful without having to manage anyone else's experience or emotions. On Christmas Day, Lily came for dinner. I cooked a small but perfect meal, and we exchanged thoughtful gifts. She gave me a beautiful leather journal for my writing. I gave her a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. "These are family heirlooms," I told her as she put them on. "They're perfect, Grandma. I'll treasure them. They're yours now, sweetheart. No conditions, no strings attached. They belong to you because I love you and want you to have them." That distinction felt important. For so many years, everything I'd given my family had come with invisible strings, expectations of gratitude and reciprocal attention. These earrings were a gift with no agenda other than love. As the new year approached, I reflected on how much my life had changed in 3 short years. I'd gone from being financially dependent and emotionally manipulated to being wealthy and autonomous. I'd gone from apologizing for existing to celebrating my own worth. I'd gone from accepting scraps of conditional love to creating a life filled with genuine relationships and authentic experiences. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been days of crushing loneliness when I missed my family despite their terrible treatment of me. There had been moments of doubt when I questioned whether I'd made the right choices. There had been nights when I'd cried from the grief of losing the family relationships I'd thought were real. But through it all, I'd kept moving forward. I'd kept choosing myself over their comfort. I'd kept building a life that reflected my values and desires rather than their expectations. Now, at 75, I felt younger and more alive than I had at 45. I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead. I went to bed each night satisfied with how I'd spent my time. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I respected rather than a burden others had to tolerate. The money from the trust had certainly made my transformation easier, but I'd come to understand that the real wealth was internal. I discovered my own worth, my own strength, my own capacity for joy. Those discoveries were priceless. On New Year's Day, I started working on a new project. I wanted to create a resource guide for elderly people who suspected they were being financially or emotionally abused by family members. I reached out to lawyers, social workers, and therapists to contribute expertise. The guide would include warning signs of abuse, steps for protecting assets, resources for legal help, and most importantly, encouragement for people to trust their instincts and fight for themselves. If something feels wrong in your family relationships, I wrote in the introduction, trust that feeling. You're not being too sensitive or unreasonable. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, especially by the people who claim to love you. Working on the project gave me a sense of purpose that went beyond my own healing. I was using my painful experiences to help others avoid or escape similar situations. My suffering was being transformed into service, but service I chose rather than service that was demanded of me. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal. I planted flowers in window boxes, filling my apartment with the scent of jasmine and roses. I booked my trip to Greece, finally ready to see the ancient ruins and blue waters I'd dreamed about for decades. Most importantly, I celebrated 3 years of freedom. 3 years of living life on my own terms. 3 years of saying yes to experiences that brought me joy and no to obligations that drained me. I thought about writing a letter to my younger self, the woman who'd spent so many years believing she didn't matter. What would I tell her? You are enough, I would say. Just as you are, without giving a single thing to anyone else, you are worthy of love and respect. Stop apologizing for needing things. Stop being grateful for basic human decency. Stop accepting emotional crumbs and calling them a feast. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. If people make you feel bad about yourself, limit your contact with them. If relationships require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable, those aren't real relationships. You have the right to say no. You have the right to change your mind. You have the right to put yourself first sometimes. You have the right to be happy, to take up space in the world, to want things for yourself. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to learn who you are when you're not trying to be what others need you to be. It's never too late to claim your worth and live accordingly. But that woman couldn't have heard those words when she needed them most. She had to learn through experience, through pain, through the slow process of waking up to her own value. Maybe that's how it works for all of us. Maybe we have to lose ourselves completely before we can find ourselves authentically. As I prepared for my trip to Greece, packing clothes I'd chosen because I liked them, booking excursions that interested me, planning an entire vacation around my own preferences, I marveled at how natural it felt now to put myself at the center of my own life. The woman who used to ask permission to buy a new dress was now planning a month-long international adventure without consulting anyone. The woman who used to apologize for existing was now writing books and giving speeches about self-worth. The woman who used to accept mistreatment because she was afraid of being alone was now cherishing her solitude and choosing her relationships carefully. I'd spent 70 years becoming the woman everyone else needed me to be. It had taken only 3 years to become the woman I was meant to be all along. On my last night in New York before leaving for Greece, I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights. The same view I'd had during my darkest days, when the noise and bustle of Manhattan had felt like a mockery of my isolated existence. Now the city looked like possibility. Like adventure. Like a place where someone could reinvent herself at any age, could start over as many times as necessary, could become anyone she had the courage to be. I raised a glass of wine to the skyline and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for the pain that woke me up. Thank you for the betrayal that set me free. Thank you for the loss that taught me what I'd never really had. Thank you for the courage to choose myself when no one else would. And most of all, thank you for the time I have left to live this life I've created, this life that belongs entirely to me." Greece was everything I'd imagined and more. I spent long days exploring ancient temples, walking through olive groves, sitting by azure seas that seemed to stretch into infinity. I ate fresh fish and drank local wine at tavernas where the owners treated me like family. I hiked mountain paths and visited monasteries perched impossibly on cliff tops. But the most amazing part wasn't the sights or the food or the spectacular sunsets. It was the way I felt moving through the world as Eleanor, not Eleanor the mother, Eleanor the grandmother, Eleanor the ex-wife, Eleanor the caregiver. Just Eleanor. A woman traveling alone because she wanted to, doing exactly what brought her joy in each moment. I struck up conversations with other travelers. A young couple from Australia who were backpacking through Europe. An elderly German man who shared my love of ancient history. A group of women from England who were celebrating one of their divorces by taking a freedom trip. When they heard my story, they were amazed. "You left your family at 72, one of them asked. "That's incredible. I don't know if I'd have that kind of courage." "You have more courage than you know," I told her. "You just haven't needed to use it yet. But when you do, it'll be there." I sent postcards to Lily, to Patricia, to Dr. Rodriguez, to my friends from the book club. Each card carried the same message: living my best life. Wish you were here, but so grateful to be here myself. On my last evening in Santorini, I sat at a restaurant built into a cliff, watching the sun set over the Aegean Sea. The sky blazed orange and pink and gold, reflected in the water like liquid fire. Other diners applauded as the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, a nightly ritual that felt both touristy and profound. I thought about all the sunsets I'd missed over the years because I was too busy taking care of other people's needs. All the beautiful moments I'd sacrificed to serve others. All the experiences I'd denied myself because I believed I didn't deserve them. No more. At 75, I was finally learning to say yes to beauty, to joy, to experiences that filled my soul rather than emptied it. When I returned to New York, I felt like I was coming home for the first time in my life. Not because Manhattan was where I'd always lived, but because I was returning to a life I'd consciously chosen and created. My apartment welcomed me back with its warm colors and comfortable furniture, with the books I'd been reading and the half-finished watercolor on my easel. This space reflected who I was becoming, not who I'd been forced to be. I unpacked my suitcase slowly, savoring the memories attached to each item. The olive oil from Crete that I'd bought from a farmer's market. The small ceramic bowl from a pottery shop in Athens where the artist had taught me about glazes and firing techniques. The silk scarf from Mykonos that reminded me of the sea at dawn. These weren't just souvenirs. They were proof that I existed as an individual, that I had preferences and experiences that belonged to no one but me. Lily came for dinner my second night back, eager to hear about my travels. "You look different, Grandma," she said as I served the Greek-inspired meal I'd prepared. Lighter somehow. More alive. I knew what she meant. I felt more alive. For the first time in my 75 years, I was living as myself rather than as an extension of other people. "Tell me everything," she said, settling in for a long evening of stories. I told her about the monasteries of Meteora, built impossibly on towering rock formations, where monks had retreated from the world to find God. I told her about the beaches of Zakynthos, where sea turtles came to nest in the sand. I told her about the olive trees of Crete, some over 1,000 years old, still bearing fruit. But mostly I told her about the feeling of waking up each morning with nothing to do but please myself. The luxury of following my curiosity wherever it led. The joy of making decisions based solely on what interested me. "I want that someday," Lily said quietly. "The freedom to just be myself without worrying about disappointing anyone." "You can have it now," I told her. "You don't have to wait until you're 75. You can start making choices that honor who you are right now." Over the following months, I watched Lily begin to change. She chose classes based on her interests rather than what looked good on applications. She ended a relationship with a boy who made her feel small. She started saying no to family obligations that felt forced or performative. My granddaughter was learning at 18 what it had taken me 7 decades to understand, that we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to accept. My second book was published that fall, titled Finding Myself at 75, A Late-Life Liberation Story. The publisher organized a small book tour, and I found myself speaking to audiences across the country about the courage to start over at any age. At every event, elderly women approached me afterward with tears in their eyes. They recognized themselves in my story. They saw their own patterns of self-sacrifice, their own acceptance of emotional scraps, their own fear of being alone that kept them trapped in relationships that diminished them. "It's not too late for you," I told each one. "It's never too late to choose yourself." Some of them wrote to me months later, sharing their own stories of liberation. A 73-year-old woman from Phoenix who finally divorced her emotionally abusive husband after 50 years of marriage. A 68-year-old grandmother from Chicago who stopped babysitting her adult children's kids every weekend so she could take art classes instead. An 80-year-old widow from Seattle who moved out of her son's house and into her own apartment despite his protests. Each story filled me with pride and hope. If my pain could inspire even one person to claim their worth and live accordingly, then every moment of suffering had been worthwhile. My resource guide for elder abuse victims was published as well, distributed free through senior centers, libraries, and social service agencies. Patricia helped me establish a small foundation to fund legal aid for elderly people being financially exploited by family members. The work gave me purpose beyond my own healing. I was using my experience to create change in the world, to protect other vulnerable people from the kind of systematic abuse I'd endured. On my 76th birthday, I threw myself another party. This one was larger, with friends I'd made through my book speaking engagements, people from my various classes and volunteer activities, neighbors who'd become genuine companions. As I looked around my living room filled with people who valued and respected me, I marveled at how rich my life had become in just 3 short years. These relationships were based on mutual interest and affection, not obligation or transaction. These people enjoyed my company because they found me interesting, funny, insightful. They didn't need anything from me except my authentic presence. Margaret from my book club gave a toast. To Eleanor, who showed all of us that it's never too late to bloom. Thank you for proving that the best years of our lives might still be ahead of us. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. This was what it felt like to be truly seen, truly valued, truly loved for who I was rather than what I could provide. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of herbal tea and reflected on my journey. The woman who'd been called a leech by her own daughter was now financially independent and emotionally free. The woman who'd apologized for existing was now confident in her worth. The woman who'd accepted crumbs was now feasting on authentic relationships and meaningful experiences. The transformation hadn't been quick or easy, but it had been complete. I'd shed not just the abusive relationships that had defined my life, but the entire identity I'd built around servitude and self-sacrifice. In its place, I discovered Eleanor, not Eleanor defined by her relationships to others, but Eleanor as a complete person in her own right. A woman with interests, talents, opinions, and dreams. A woman worthy of respect and love and beautiful experiences. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Is this Eleanor Morrison?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Eleanor. My name is Susan Richards. I just finished reading your book, and I wanted to thank you. I'm 82 years old, and I've been living with my daughter's family for 5 years. After reading your story, I realized they've been taking my social security checks and making me feel grateful for the privilege. I called a lawyer today. We talked for nearly an hour." Susan's story was heartbreakingly familiar: adult children who saw their aging parent as a source of income rather than a person deserving dignity and respect. Financial abuse disguised as family care. Emotional manipulation designed to keep her compliant and grateful. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I end up alone? What if I can't take care of myself? What if they're right that no one else will want me around?" I understood her fear completely. It was the same fear that had kept me trapped for so many years. "Susan," I said gently, "being alone is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Being mistreated by people who claim to love you is worse. Being made to feel worthless is worse. Living as someone else's source of income rather than as a human being with inherent value is worse. But what if I'm not strong enough to start over at 82? You are," I assured her. "You survived 82 years, raised children, worked, loved, grieved, endured. You have more strength than you realize. And you don't have to do it alone. There are resources, people who will help, lawyers who specialize in elder abuse cases." By the end of our conversation, Susan sounded different. Stronger. More determined. She promised to call Patricia's office for a referral to an elder law attorney in her state. After we hung up, I realized this was exactly why I'd been meant to go through what I'd experienced. Not just to save myself, but to light the way for other women like Susan, like me, like all the elderly people being told they should be grateful for whatever treatment they receive. My suffering had been transformed into service, but service I chose rather than service that was demanded of me. The difference was everything. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was 76 years old, with silver hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of both sorrow and joy. But there was something else in her expression, something that had been missing for most of my life. Dignity. Self-respect. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth and living according to it. I brushed my teeth with expensive toothpaste I'd bought because I liked the taste. I washed my face with moisturizer that smelled like roses because it made me happy. I put on silk pajamas I'd purchased in Greece because they felt luxurious against my skin. These small acts of self-care, so simple and yet revolutionary for someone who'd spent 7 decades putting everyone else's needs before her own, were daily reminders of how far I'd come. I climbed into bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and down pillows, surrounded by the scent of jasmine candles and the sound of classical music playing softly. My bedroom was a sanctuary I'd created for myself, reflecting my tastes and desires rather than someone else's expectations. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about tomorrow. I had plans to visit the Met with Patricia, then lunch at a small French cafe we'd been wanting to try. In the evening, I'd work on my 3rd book, a guide for women over 60 who wanted to reinvent their lives. Tomorrow would be another day lived entirely on my own terms. Another day of choices made without having to consider anyone else's approval or disapproval. Another day of being Eleanor, not someone's mother or grandmother or ex-wife, but simply Eleanor. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. If you're listening to my story and recognizing parts of your own experience, I want you to know something. You deserve better. You deserve to be valued, respected, and loved without conditions. You deserve to put yourself first sometimes without feeling guilty about it. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to choose yourself. Have you ever found yourself in a relationship where you gave everything and received scraps in return? Have you ever been made to feel grateful for basic respect and kindness? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if my words have touched you in any way, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but necessary truths. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how much you can sacrifice for others. Your value doesn't depend on other people's approval. You are enough, just as you are, and you deserve to live like you believe it. Thank you for listening to my heart. Thank you for allowing me to share my journey from victim to victor, from doormat to dignified woman, from existing to truly living. Now go out there and claim the life that's waiting for you. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be.